Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. So for today's sketchbook kind of doodle session or sketchbook session, I guess, I did have a little bit of a hard time thinking on what I wanted to do for today's spread. So at the top of this kind of page near the center, I have written down half very lightly in kind of like small text. And the reason being is that usually at the beginning of a sketchbook, I actually start to count out the signatures to see if I can figure out where the halfway point is in my sketchbook. That way I can mark halfway, and then in the future when I finally reach to like kind of like halfway in my sketchbook, I'm kind of like notified myself, and it kind of gives me a little bit of that push to actually continue to work in my sketchbook so I can eventually finish it. Just because I like having the idea of like a little bit of a push forward in terms of like wanting to use my sketchbook a little bit more. So having a halfway mark kind of just gives me a little bit of motivation. So I did show a little bit in the beginning and I kind of talked over that portion, but I am going to be drawing my OC Masaki just because he is kind of like the inside cover of the sketchbook that I painted in gouache. And if you're interested in that video, I'll link it down below if I remember to put in the description. But I wanted to try something a little bit different, as I actually did a spread or two afterwards because I ended up not doing the halfway page immediately because I was still kind of like deliberating on what I wanted to do for the spread itself. And because of that, I don't really want to use anything that might wrinkle or damage the paper too much, because I do have drawings on either sides of the spread, and having any bleed through might cause a little bit of like, I don't know, either disfiguration or discoloration of whatever sketch or doodle that I have on the other side. So I kind of kept things a little bit on the simple side at first, and we're gonna mix up a few of the mediums as we kind of go on. So initially, I was just gonna do a spread of Masaki with pencil and watercolor and maybe a little bit of ballpoint pen, but you'll see that I will deliberately leave in some gaps here and there, and we will fill in the gaps with a bit of a different method a little bit later. So right now I'm just sketching with kind of like pencil and just kind of planning out the spread a little bit. I'm drawing Masaki very just like simply, just because I find him kind of more like a comfort character for myself. There's like certain ways that I default drawing him, and I don't know, just like the whole process of usually drawing Masaki for myself is very structured in a certain way. I have like a pattern that I tend to draw his hair in. So even right now I start with his bangs, which is kind of like this little section right here. Then I have the bangs that slide more to the right and kind of flick outwards, and then I'll add his ahoge and any side pieces, and then I'll add in the left side, and then we can fill out the rest of his skull, which is kind of how I usually approach his hair. So because of that, I feel like when I draw Masaki in my sketchbook, sometimes I mindlessly doodle him, and it becomes just like doodle vomiting in a sense, where I just draw absolutely whatever I want with whatever ideas or like outfits, colors, and I can just use Masaki kind of as like a vessel for all of that. Not only that, I think because I enjoy his color scheme a lot, and just he's like a more calm, kind of cute and happier demeanor kind of character, it's just very calming and easy for me to draw him when I'm in more or less of a good mood, or if I want to be in a good mood. It's just nice to have an OC that you enjoy drawing a lot. So that is Masaki for me. And I decided to draw him in more of his summery, more spring outfit, which is no longer the turtleneck, and he kind of has this teal and white kind of t-shirt that's kind of a little bit boxier, but the t-shirt, or at least the collar part, has like a white little, I don't know what you call them, I guess like it's the collar part, but it's like kind of shifted to the side. I remember talking about this in the past, that in a previous interview, Vernon from 17 had a very cute kind of like shirt, like a collared shirt and a sweater combo, but his collared shirt was like a kind of like big collar, but it's like tilted to the side, and it looks super cute. I wish I could find the picture of it, but that kind of like ingrained into my brain, so I kind of wanted to have that asymmetrical look for Masaki as well, just because I do like having something around his neck to kind of play around with. So like when he wears a turtleneck, I could do that, but with this kind of outfit, I do like having that white collar around his neck. So after that, I decided to use watercolor, excuse me. I wanted to use watercolor for the colors. So it would have been nice if I could have used gouache for the kind of halfway middle spread, just because it will tie in nicely with the front cover and then eventually the back cover. So it would have been nice to do that, but I didn't, just because, like I said, I didn't want to spend too much time on something that's going to potentially warp and affect the different pages on the sides. Now, I feel like people might not care too much, like once you finish with a sketch, and some people don't care if they need to keep it pristine, some people don't care about smudging or anything like that. I'm a little bit particular sometimes, so I definitely do think about it whenever I plan out spreads, or if I want to use a certain medium, I'll have to kind of plan out my pages a little bit in advance. But watercolor, I feel like, is a simple way for me to add color without disrupting any other spreads. Water-based markers is kind of similar as well, but if you like kind of overlay too much of the markers, you could accidentally oversaturate like the page and cause a little bit of ghosting that I've noticed. Same with like ink here and there, which is why I'm going to be using ballpoint pen to kind of spruce up some of the lines. Pencil's usually a safe choice as well, but watercolor for me is just a quick way for me to add colors in a large area that are still kind of like more or less vibrant. And I do like the look of watercolor with ballpoint pen, and hopefully you guys will see what I mean in a bit. I just like how it looks because the black of the ballpoint pen makes the lines stand out a little bit more compared to how dull and a little bit more hard to see it is with just the graphite on the page with the watercolor. So I did pretty much just a simple wash of the colors. I went back in for the skin to add a little bit of shadow. I went back into some of the brown areas, so like his hair and his apron, to add a little bit more of shadows as well. And then after that, I added a little bit for the collar, but I didn't really do too much in terms of shadows for like his kind of boxier shirt-ish area. So after that, I'm going to switch over and use the Pentel RSVP ballpoint pen, and I kind of switch over to the Papermate Inkjoy as well, just because depending on how I want the inking to look, I kind of switch the pens, because the Pentel RSVP just dispenses a little bit less ink. It feels much more like a mechanical pencil. It has very sharp and very kind of like faint lines, if anything, but it feels good drawing details with it if you want to build up value slowly. But the Papermate Inkjoy one is just has a little bit of a thicker line, dispenses a lot more ink, and it's just easier for me to do kind of line work quickly if I just want to do kind of like a flick of the pen rather than slowly building up value over time. So that's why I switched over to the Inkjoy for the most part, and that's what I'm going to be mostly using for, I think, everything else other than the face. But I do have to be a little bit careful because sometimes this ink does smudge a little bit, but it is kind of like one of my favorites to do whenever I'm working with ballpoint pen, just because the color tends to be a little bit vibrant and easy to layer up, because the Papermate Inkjoy, at least the set that I bought, came with like several different colors, but it's like several sets of the same colors, if that makes sense. So I have like a plethora of plethora of colors that I can use for like different spreads and stuff if I wish to. And I don't have to be stingy about using the black one, because I believe it came with like 2 or 3 blacks, which is kind of nice. So I'm gonna doodle probably quite a bit with ballpoint pen here and there whenever I can. In this sketchbook in like particular, compared to previous ones in the past, I feel like I've painted a lot less. I paint like a lot less in general compared to the last few years anyways, but I haven't been doing too much gouache in the sketchbook. I think it's due to the fact that I haven't found time to just sit down and do a spread in my sketchbook where I can spend a few hours just painting. But watercolor I do miss, and I think I talk about this like in every other video, but I want to get back and do more watercolor. I want to learn more techniques. I want to incorporate it a little bit more into different illustrations and stuff where I can. And I think that's kind of like channeling into some of the previous videos that I posted, because I've been doing a little bit of experimenting with digital brushes and mediums to kind of replicate that watercolor look as well. And maybe it's just because I'm kind of like reminiscing and missing it. Okay, so let me talk a bit about this before we actually switch over to a different medium, as I'm kind of finishing up the lines for the Masaki drawings. So in Masaki's arms for this one, you can see that I kind of left a blank area, and then the one in the center is kind of like he's holding, potentially could be holding something, and then the one in the corner I'm going to also kind of low-key accessorize. So we are going to fill in these little blank spaces, and what I'm going to be using today is the Ohuhu marker paper, and I have the scrap sheet that I was kind of playing around with a little bit, and we're going to play around with alcohol markers as well. And the reason being is that the Instagram algorithm has given me a lot of people who work with just alcohol markers in general, and like I said, I'm going to be using Ohuhu, and I'm going to be using, I think, Arrtx's colored pencils to help with the line work a little bit later. But as I am going to be doing this, let me explain this first before I go back to my Instagram tangent. I'm going to be drawing like a bunch of different flowers. I'm going to draw a flower crown, and I'm going to do kind of like a mishmash and collaging a bouquet for that little empty area where Masaki's kind of like cradling a bouquet paper wrap thing, and then the other one's going to be him holding the flower, and then the other one will be a flower crown. But I didn't take in consideration how I wanted to cut these out, so we'll get to that in a little bit. But back to why I'm even doing this part with marker and why I'm treating it more like a collage-ish way. So one, the Instagram thing, the algorithm gave me a lot of people who work in a very simple, very clean, very cutesy and tiny and very round and very appealing to me for me to look at, because I love like bright, cute, tiny things, especially for like illustrations and stuff. It just sparks something in my brain that goes like, oh my god, kind of thing. And they did a lot of like Pokemon or like any kind of like animated movie characters and stuff, and they look super cute, but their approach is always the same, even though they're different artists that I've been getting recommendations of their reels, which is basically they sketch in usually a warmer color, and I believe some of them use like a Faber-Castell, some of them use Prismacolor, some people use some kind of like water-based marker, or not water-based marker, water-based, maybe like a watercolor pencil or something, where it can kind of blend in with the markers. So I sketched everything with my Pilot Color Eno, and you can see that I'm going to be coloring all of the flowers in with the alcohol markers, and I'm not going to worry about line work at this point. I'm not going to do line work with my usual markers like the water-based markers or felt tip liners or any kind of inking in that aspect. Because one thing I really liked when I was looking at these people's reels, and they were doing more of like, I don't know, softer looks for their marker illustrations, is that they were using actually pencil crayons or colored pencils, and they did it in such a way that they're able to match the colors in a very, it was like kind of bold lines, but they feel very soft because they're color matching very closely to the colors that they picked for the markers. So I'm not going to do it like justice for probably today's session. I would like to reattempt this in the future, and I would love to do like little chibis or something, which is why like on this kind of like scrap paper that I had already ripped out of the Ohuhu Marker Paper Pad, I had a little kind of like bald chibi on the side, and I had a little bud do. It's because I was going to do a bunch of testing, but I got super impatient just because I got busy this week. So I decided that I would just, you know, kind of wing it for today's session, which is, you know, it has mixed results, if anything, but it's kind of something that's fun to do. So for the color scheme for the flowers that I wanted to give for Masaki, I was focusing mostly on white and yellow. Even though I didn't really do any white and yellow on the spread itself, it's going to be like a weird mishmash of colors. I kind of wish I did more of a clover themed, just because if I did clovers, it would have tied in nicely with the front and eventually with the back portion of my sketchbook, because I do like matching the front and the back if I can. And I tend to do those ones with like gouache or some kind of medium that gives a little bit more of a higher finish or kind of finished illustration kind of look. But this one feels very collagey, Oh, maybe I should talk about that. So another reason why I wanted to go with this route is that if I wanted to do markers and I wanted to do pencil crayons in this more softer look, I thought it'd be kind of fun to cut them out and arrange the bouquet for Masaki's kind of whatever he's holding and kind of just arrange them however I wanted, which is why I have like a bunch of different flowers and kind of just different arrangements of the flowers so that I can kind of nitpick and pick how I wanted to arrange them. Now, what I didn't take into consideration is the pain of cutting them all out and not being able to have a thick enough border around, because I got a little bit impatient. If I took time to plan it and actually kind of do thicker outlines, it probably would have been easier for me to cut, because I ended up doing I don't know if it's like a 2 to 3 millimeter border around each of the flowers so that I could get a little bit of, I don't know, an easier time cutting, and I wouldn't cut too much of the flowers details off just because they are on the tinier side and I didn't want to be super clean about it. So you're gonna see the look of it. It's gonna look very collagey, but I didn't really mind too much in the end, just because I did watch, like, hopefully you guys are fans of them as well. I watch a lot of like Drawfee Extra and stuff, and I love watching their work. But one of the recent ones that they did was actually, one of the artists on there is named Karina, and she does kind of like a mixed media approach to one of their videos, which I found super cool. So she was able to incorporate a lot of different designy aspects by adding in her traditional art and using like photography and all this stuff, and I thought it was really cool. And I kind of wished back during when I did like intermedia or even printmaking or just like painting in general for my classes and courses, I wish I did more kind of like melding of mediums together. So today is kind of like, I don't know, it's just gonna be a mess of a spread and kind of fun approach. I definitely think there's a different way I could have approached today's spread as well, and the reason why I didn't really want to do that is actually because I didn't want to create a bulk of paper in the middle of my sketchbook because it might become a pain to draw on a little bit later. Also, I'm adding text here, so I wanted to pick a cute kind of like turquoisey color and either a peach or a pink color to do halfway little indication, because I do like writing it somewhere in the sketchbook, and sometimes I do leave the tiny little text at the very top, but sometimes I want it to be a little bit more bold and in your face to let you know that, hey, you are halfway. Yeah, but here's kind of where I was experimenting with the lines. So you can see that I was gonna go with more thick lines for the text, and then I decided that I would just do a simple line around it instead, and I will deal with the cutting when I have to deal with it, because I was definitely not having it at that time. So, I don't know. I could have done more of a paper doll kind of approach. I even thought about doing it just purely with markers and just pretending to give it that paper doll look by adding kind of like a shadow underneath certain parts to kind of make the thing appear that there's like a different thickness between certain sections of the character. But I decided not to because it was just too much planning on my part and kind of like fiddling around with certain things, and I still have to cut things out and stick it into my sketchbook. But I wanted to have the sketchbook spread not be like the drawings not to be drawn on an entirely different surface and then only transferred to the paper. So I definitely wanted to make sure that the base of whatever I was working on would be in my sketchbook first. Also, I kind of wish I stuck with the kind of like that olivey light green color for the white flowers rather than the brown. I think it just looks a little bit more vibrant and a little bit cuter. It doesn't look too bad with the brown, but I just wish maybe the green works a little, like, I don't know, for me it works a little bit better than the brown. I definitely like the brown with the kind of flowers that are a little bit more in shadow, and the brown works definitely with the yellow, but maybe the green works a little bit better if I added it for every white flower, because I think it looks a little bit cuter and it kind of ties in the green leaves a little bit easier as well. But that's like kind of nitpicking, and you know, you don't really have to be too precious with your sketchbook anyways. And I don't think I'm going to be treating the sketchbook too preciously anyways. There's a lot of pages which I feel like I used as like dumping ground for some of my post-it note doodles or post-it note planning portions, and just dumped everything in. So I don't know. I would like to experiment a little bit more with different mediums. I want to do more inking too. I was actually telling my brother earlier that I wanted to practice more with like fine liners and doing more black and white drawings and stuff, because like there's so many things I see on Pinterest that I love seeing, like mangakas work on their manga spreads and like their manga pages where you can physically see their sketches and then the inking process on top, and it looks so cool. But I wish I could use the G pen the way that they use it to produce the lines so thinly. So I might do a little bit more practicing, or I don't know, I might just break out my fine liners and maybe we'll do like a makeshift mock-up spread of like a comic page from Masaki, or maybe I'll just do something. Actually, no, I have a plan. I'm gonna see if I can execute it, and I'll see if I can do it for next week. We'll see. I think last few videos I've been kind of juggling with like in real life stuff that's been kind of bothering me a little bit, and it's been stressing me out to the point where I'm getting a lot less sleep. So I do apologize that my things are a little bit all over the place, or the things I'm posting on Instagram or anywhere else feels a little bit more inactive, just because for the next like week or so it's going to be a little bit up and down. I think by the time this video comes out, I think things will be settled, so I think maybe it's fine. But let's talk a little bit more about this drawing process for now. Okay, so basically at this point, I am cutting and kind of messing around with the composition and stuff for the flowers. So you can see that I was trying to cut out the portions right here to make it look like Masaki is going to be holding the sunflower. And the thing I do regret, like I said, is that I kind of wish I didn't do the white borders. It does give it a very sticker book or like collage effect, which I don't mind, but I feel like it just didn't fit to how I wanted it to look in a certain way. And I think the bouquet would have looked super cute if it didn't have the white spaces around, so that I actually could probably arrange them in a better way. That, or I could have planned it out a little bit better so that maybe I had more tinier flowers that I could have arranged rather than these gigantic kind of longer stalks of gigantic roses and really weird sized sunflowers. But I don't know, it still turned out kind of cute. I also just slapped on the text on the side. Luckily it kind of fit for the most part, and you can see that the color palette is just really off. I should have just made it green and yellow to match the entire spread, but I wasn't thinking on my part. I have half the mind to even just ripping it out of my sketchbook and putting it, I don't know, somewhere else, and then making a new one with the green and the yellow, because I think it'll just look cuter. But also the pink and purple feels a little bit out of place, but I think it does look kind of cute on his head, where it's like I decided to flip it upside down so that it's kind of curving upwards rather than downwards, like how I actually initially planned it to be. But I think it looks cuter with it being upwards because Masaki is looking upwards towards you, so maybe it makes a little bit more sense. But I did measure that one out at least. I just measured it with my fingers, drew a curve around the same size so that it could fit a little bit more properly. And then right here, I'm making sure that everything is kind of stuck on. I did cut out a lot of portions where I was kind of fiddling with the composition of the flowers. I'm just gonna like live with the fact that I don't know how to arrange flowers. Even though I like drawing flowers to some extent, I had no idea how to arrange them. I also cut out Budzu and stuck him in next to Masaki, just because I feel like Masaki would be a grass type or a Pokemon breeder if he was into the Pokemon universe. But last but not least, I'm adding in a little bit of warmth to his face by adding a little bit of blush here and there to his cheeks and his nose, just because I wanted to add a little bit more of that cute little blushing effect. So yeah, I think that's it for the spread. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and hopefully I'll be in a better position next week for you guys. So yeah, I think that's it for today. Yeah, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!